The automatic sliding doors of St. Jude's Memorial hissed open, letting in a bitter gust of November rain. Peyton zipped her threadbare fleece jacket to her chin, bone-tired after a brutal 14-hour shift in the trauma ward. She just wanted her car, her quiet apartment, and a hollow sleep. She didn't get any of them. 3 matte black SUVs cut sharply into the ambulance bay, tires screeching against the wet concrete, blocking her path. The doors opened in synchronized unison. 4 men stepped out into the downpour. They wore civilian clothes, dark jackets, jeans, but they moved with the lethal, predatory quiet of a Tier 1 element. The lead man, tall and broad-shouldered, locked eyes with her. He didn't ask for her ID. He didn't ask for a doctor. He stopped exactly 3 feet away, his posture rigid, and spoke loud enough to cut through the driving rain. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." The fluorescent lights of the emergency department had a specific hum, a low, oscillating frequency that Peyton swore she could feel in her molars by the 12th hour of her shift. It was 0600. The end of the line. She stood at the stainless steel sink, scrubbing dried blood from beneath her fingernails. The water was scalding, turning her knuckles a raw, irritated pink, but she didn't lower the temperature. The heat was grounding. It kept her tethered to the present, pulling her mind away from the phantom echoes of places she no longer allowed herself to think about. "Hey, Peyton." Peyton shut off the faucet with her wrist and reached for a paper towel, her face a practiced mask of mild exhaustion. She turned to see Mark, a second-year resident who looked like he hadn't slept since medical school began. Bed 4 needs a final set of vitals before discharge, and we're backed up in triage. A pileup on I-90. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes pleading. "I know you're off the clock in 10 minutes. "I've got it, Mark," Peyton said, her voice steady, remarkably devoid of the irritation most nurses would rightfully express. "You're a lifesaver. Seriously." He flashed a grateful, fatigued smile and vanished down the corridor. Peyton tossed the paper towel into the bin and walked toward bed 4. She moved differently than the rest of the civilian staff. Where they rushed, their shoulders tight with frantic energy, Peyton glided. Her footfalls were silent. Her eyes constantly scanned the room, unconsciously tracking the exits, the blind spots, the makeshift weapons in the room, a heavy IV pole, a pair of trauma shears. It was a hard habit to break. 5 years out, and her brain still operated in a theater of war. She took the patient's vitals. A middle-aged man recovering from a mild cardiac event spoke to him in a soothing, professional cadence and logged the data into the chart. When she finally walked back to the nurse's station, the clock on the wall clicked to 6:15. She was officially a ghost. Peyton retreated to the staff locker room, a cramped, windowless box smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. She peeled off her blue scrubs. As she pulled her plain gray t-shirt over her head, she caught her reflection in the smudged mirror on the inside of her locker door. At 32, she looked older. Though the wear wasn't in her skin, it was in her eyes. They were a pale, striking green, but flat, heavily guarded. And then, there were the scars. A jagged, faded white line traced up her left oblique, the lasting signature of a piece of shrapnel in the Koringal Valley. She traced it absently with her thumb, a habit she did when she was exceptionally tired, before quickly pulling her sweater down to hide it. She swapped her comfortable nursing clogs for a pair of worn-in, waterproof boots. She didn't own an umbrella. She didn't like having her hands occupied when she walked to her car in the dark. Slinging her duffel bag over her shoulder, Peyton walked out of the locker room, nodding politely to the day shift staff trickling in. They knew her as Peyton Miller, a quiet, incredibly competent, fiercely private woman who never talked about her past, never went out for drinks after work, and never panicked when a gunshot victim rolled through the doors. They thought she was just naturally stoic. They didn't know she had spent 6 years as a JSOC forward surgical asset, operating in the dirt under heavy enemy fire. They didn't know the name she had buried. She pushed through the swinging double doors into the main lobby. The security guard, an older man named Stan, gave her a tired wave from behind his desk. "Nasty out there today, Peyton," Stan called out, gesturing to the glass doors where the Seattle rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold and red. "I've seen worse, Stan," Peyton replied softly. "Have a good shift." She pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out under the concrete overhang of the ambulance bay. The cold air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the hospital. She took a deep breath, letting the chill fill her lungs, preparing for the 3-block walk to the employee parking structure. She took exactly one step into the rain. That was when the vehicles arrived. They didn't pull in like ambulances, desperate and loud. They pulled in like a strike force. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, heavily tinted and riding low on reinforced suspensions, cut off the street in a sharp, synchronized maneuver. They bypassed the designated emergency lanes, moving with a deliberate, aggressive speed, and boxed off the entire exit of the bay. Water sprayed violently from their tires as they slammed on their brakes, coming to a halt in a perfect V formation. Peyton froze. Her civilian mind, the one she had spent 5 years cultivating, told her it was a VIP arriving, maybe a politician or a high-profile prisoner in need of medical care. But her nervous system, the deeply ingrained wiring of a covert operative, screamed a different reality. Threat vector. She dropped her duffel bag an inch, shifting the weight so her dominant hand was free. Her eyes darted left the glass doors of the hospital. Right, a concrete pillar offering half cover. The doors of the lead vehicle opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the deluge. They didn't hunch their shoulders against the rain. They moved with a predatory, relaxed confidence. Broad chests, thick necks, hands resting near their waistbands, civilian clothing, but tactical boots, SEALs. Peyton didn't need to see a trident to know. She knew the posture, the quiet arrogance, the way they scanned the perimeter in overlapping sectors before their eyes snapped to the target. The lead man broke off from the pack and walked directly toward her. As he stepped out of the shadows and under the amber glow of the overhang lights, Peyton's breath caught slightly in her throat, though she didn't let it show on her face. He was strikingly tall, with a jawline carved out of granite and a small, pale scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His dark hair was cut tight to the sides, soaked with rain, but it was his eyes that locked her in place, dark, unblinking, analytical. He was assessing her the same way she was assessing him. He stopped exactly 3 feet away. The universally recognized distance of a professional who isn't trying to crowd you, but wants you to know you can't run. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried easily over the drumming rain. "You need to come with us." Peyton didn't blink. She held his gaze, consciously slowing her breathing. She forced the Nurse Peyton persona forward, burying the operative. "I think you have the wrong person," Peyton said, her voice perfectly level, dripping with mild confusion. "I'm a nurse. My shift just ended. If you need medical assistance, the emergency entrance is right behind me." The man didn't move a muscle. The 3 men behind him remained statue still, the rain pouring off them. "We don't need the emergency room," the man said quietly. "We need you, Major." The rank hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Major. No one had called her that in half a decade. She had scrubbed her records. She was a ghost. Peyton's posture instantly shifted. The slight civilian slouch vanished. Her spine straightened, her chin came up, and the flat, dead look in her green eyes was replaced by a sharp, icy calculation. "You're out of your jurisdiction," Peyton said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of bedside manner. "And you have bad intel. The major died in a helicopter crash in Helmand. I'm Nurse Miller." "My name is Jessie," the man said, taking a microscopic half-step forward. The air between them suddenly felt suffocatingly thick. "I'm the team leader for Echo Platoon. And I know exactly who you are, Peyton. I know how you disappeared. And I know why." "Then you know I don't go back," she snapped back, the anger finally bleeding through her composure. "Whatever you want, the answer is no. Step aside." She moved to walk past him, her shoulder brushing his chest. It was like walking into a brick wall. He didn't budge, but his hand came up, hovering just an inch from her arm, refusing to actually grab her, a sign of immense, disciplined restraint. "I wouldn't be here if we had another choice," Jessie said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, meant only for her. He leaned in slightly, and she could smell rain, ozone, and the faint, metallic scent of gun oil on his jacket. "Valkyrie is down," Jessie said. Peyton stopped dead. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The blood drained entirely from her face. "Valkyrie. Where?" Peyton whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. "Compromised. Bleeding out." "We have a bird waiting at McCord," Jessie replied, his dark eyes searching hers, recognizing the exact moment her walls collapsed. "He wouldn't let anyone else touch him. He said if we didn't bring you, he'd rather bleed." Peyton stared at Jessie, her mind racing through 1,000 agonizing calculations. The life she had built, the safety of the shadows, the the sheer terror of stepping back into the blood and the fire. She looked at Jesse's hands. He was clenching his jaw, masking his own desperation. This wasn't just a mission for him. Valkyrie was his brother-in-arms, too. Peyton slowly closed her eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. When she opened them, the nurse was gone entirely. "I need my bag," she said coldly. Peyton didn't go back inside to explain herself. She didn't call her charge nurse. She simply turned, scooped up her duffel bag from the wet concrete, and walked toward the center SUV. Jesse signaled with a sharp flick of his chin. The two operators flanked the vehicle, opening the heavy, armored rear door for her. Peyton climbed in, the heavy thud of the door shutting behind her, sealing her back into a world she had sworn to leave behind. Jesse slid into the seat opposite her. The interior of the Suburban was dark, illuminated only by the faint green glow of the tactical comms dashboard in the front console. It smelled exactly as she remembered, a sterile mix of damp gear, adrenaline, and cold tension. The driver, a massive man with a thick beard, put the vehicle in gear. The convoy lurched forward, seamlessly merging back onto the slick Seattle streets, accelerating far past the civilian speed limit. For the first 10 minutes, the cabin was suffocatingly silent. Peyton sat rigidly, her eyes locked on the rain streaking horizontally across the reinforced glass. She could feel Jesse watching her, not with suspicion, but with a heavy, intense curiosity. He was studying the woman who had supposedly died, the legend that JSOC whispers still talked about when trauma surgery was mentioned. "You're going to need to brief me, Jesse," Peyton said, finally breaking the silence. She didn't look at him. Her voice was pure steel. "If I'm walking into a sterile field blind, he's going to die before I even scrub in." "It's not a sterile field," Jesse corrected quietly. Peyton slowly turned her head, her green eyes flashing. "Explain." Jesse leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The proximity brought a sudden, palpable charge to the small space. He was a man used to giving orders, but right now, he was entirely at her mercy. Target was a black site extraction in Eastern Europe. Classified. "Went sideways," Jesse said, his voice low, clipping his words. "Valkyrie took a round to the upper chest, right below the clavicle. Subclavian artery is compromised. We managed to pack it and get him on a C-17, but he's throwing clots. The pressure is dropping." "Why didn't you divert to Landstuhl?" Peyton demanded. Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany was the premier military hospital for operators. "Because the op didn't officially happen," Jesse said, his eyes darkening. "If he rolls into Landstuhl, bells ring in Washington. The asset we extracted is with him. If the world knows where we are, the asset is dead. And so is Valkyrie. We had to fly under the radar, straight back to the States." Peyton shook her head, running a trembling hand through her damp hair. "You brought a critically wounded man on a transatlantic flight. He needs a cardiothoracic suite, Jesse. He needs a bypass machine. I have a trauma bag and a flashlight. We have a makeshift surgical bay set up in a secure hangar at McCord Air Force Base," Jesse countered, his tone hardening. "We have the gear you need. Blood, tools, monitors. We just don't have the hands. Military surgeons." "He explicitly said your name," Jesse interrupted, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "before he went under. He grabbed my rig, pulled me down, and told me that if I let a military doc open him up, the brass would find out about the op and burn the whole team. He said, 'Find Peyton. Bring me the ghost.'" Peyton stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. "Valkyrie, call sign for Elias Thorne, the man who had saved her life in the Korengal Valley, the man who had helped her fake her death when the JSOC operational tempo finally broke her mind. He was calling in the ultimate debt. "You know what happens to me if the DoD finds out I'm alive?" Peyton asked softly, the vulnerability finally cracking through her armor. Jesse held her gaze, and for a second, the hardened SEAL team leader softened. His eyes traced the exhausted lines of her face, recognizing the immense sacrifice she was making just by sitting in this vehicle. "I'm the only one who knows who you are," Jesse said, his voice dropping to an intimate, reassuring register. "My team thinks they just picked up an off-the-books civilian contractor. You save his life, I put you back in your car at the hospital, and you go back to being Nurse Miller. You have my word." Peyton looked at him. She looked at the scar on his eyebrow, the rigid set of his shoulders, the absolute, unyielding loyalty radiating from him. He was terrifyingly capable, but he wasn't lying. She looked back out the window, as the massive, gated perimeter of McCord Air Force Base loomed in the distance through the rain. "Tell the pilot to have 6 units of O-negative waiting at the hangar door," Peyton said, her voice dropping into the cold, clinical rhythm of a combat surgeon. "And tell them if anyone asks for my ID, I'll walk right back out." Jesse gave a short, sharp nod. He reached up and pressed his earpiece. "Base, this is Echo Actual," Jesse said into the comms. "The package is secure. Have the blood ready. The doctor is in." The black Suburbans cleared the fortified security gates of McCord Air Force Base without slowing down. The guards didn't check IDs. They saw the encrypted transponder codes and waved them through, their faces pale in the rain. They tore down the slick tarmac, bypassing the main terminal entirely, heading for the desolate, unlit stretch of the auxiliary airstrip. Looming in the darkness, swallowed by the torrential downpour, was a C-17 Globemaster. It sat outside a massive, corrugated steel hangar, its immense engine still ticking as they cooled. "We're here," Jesse said, unbuckling his seatbelt before the vehicle even came to a complete stop. The Suburban slammed into park inside the cavernous hangar. Peyton kicked her door open and stepped into a sensory assault. The air tasted heavily of aviation fuel, damp concrete, and the distinct, coppery tang of fresh blood. The hangar was vast and shadowed, lit only by a perimeter of blindingly bright, portable halogen work lights focused on a sterile tarp laid out in the center of the concrete floor. It wasn't a hospital, it was a forward operating nightmare. "Move," Jesse barked, his voice echoing off the metal walls. His men fanned out, securing the hangar doors, their rifles resting low against their chests. Peyton sprinted toward the light. On the tarp, resting on a tactical gurney, was a man. His chest was a mess of soaked crimson gauze and combat tourniquets. A young Air Force medic, his face entirely devoid of color, was desperately leaning his body weight into the man's shoulder, his hands slipping on the blood. "I can't hold the pressure," the medic shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "He's lost too much volume. Heart rate is threaded at 140, pressure is 60 over palp." Peyton didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask for permission. She dropped her duffel bag, kicked off her wet boots, and slid into the blinding light of the halogen lamps. "Off him," Peyton commanded, her voice slicing through the frantic energy of the room like a scalpel. The young medic looked up, bewildered by the woman in the damp gray sweater and jeans. "Who the hell are you?" "I can't let go. He'll bleed out." A massive hand gripped the medic's shoulder armor. It was Jesse. "Step back, son. You're done." The medic stumbled backward. Before the blood could geyser from the wound, Peyton's hands were there. She drove her interlaced fingers directly into the cavity beneath the shattered collarbone, finding the severed edge of the subclavian artery by memory and blind touch. She clamped it against the first rib. Elias Thorne's body violently arched off the gurney, a wet, guttural groan escaping his pale lips. "I've got you, Elias," Peyton whispered, her face inches from his. "I've got you. Stay with me." Elias's eyelids fluttered. They were bruised and heavy, but when they focused on her, a faint, bloody smile cracked his lips. "Ghost," he rasped, the word bubbling with fluid, "took your sweet time." "Shut up and bleed quietly," Peyton said, though her throat tightened dangerously. She hadn't seen him since the night she vanished. He looked older, harder. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto Jesse, who was standing perfectly still just outside the light. "I need light directly over his chest. I need suction, a vascular clamp, and I need someone to pump that O-negative into him manually." "The IV drip isn't fast enough," she ordered, her mind entirely consumed by the tactical math of trauma surgery. "I'll bag the blood," the young medic stammered, scrambling for the cooler. "Jesse," Peyton said, her voice dropping an octave. Jesse stepped immediately into the glare of the lights. "Tell me what to do. Strip your jacket and roll up your sleeves. Scrub your hands with the iodine on that tray," Peyton instructed, not taking her eyes off Elias's chest. "I don't have a surgical tech. I don't have an assistant. You're it." Jesse didn't hesitate. Within 10 seconds, his tactical jacket was on the floor, his muscular forearms soaked in dark brown iodine. He stood across from her, his face a mask of absolute focus. "I'm going to release pressure," Peyton said, her green eyes locking onto Jesse's dark ones. In the chaos of the hangar, the connection between them felt singular, almost electric. "When I do, the cavity is going to fill instantly. You have the suction tube. You keep that pool clear so I can see the tear. If I can't see it, I can't clamp it, and he dies. Do you understand?" I keep it clear, Jesse repeated, his jaw clenched. On 3, Peyton said, her breathing slowing to a calm, steady rhythm. The ghost was fully awake now. 1, 2, 3. Peyton lifted her hands. The blood welled up instantly, dark and arterial, threatening to overflow the cavity. Suction, Peyton barked. Jesse thrust the rigid plastic tip of the suction wand into the wound. The machine beside them roared, loudly slurping the fluid, but the bleeding was catastrophic. It was like trying to empty a sinking boat with a teacup. It's too fast, Jesse said, his voice strained, though his hands didn't shake. Peyton didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for civilians. She grabbed a pair of heavy retractor instruments from the sterile tray. Take these, she ordered, shoving the metal handles into Jesse's left hand. Hook them under the fractured clavicle and pull up. Hard. Give me an angle. Jesse did as he was told. The muscles in his forearms bunched, cords of tension standing out as he forcibly levered the shattered bone upward, ignoring the sickening crunch of cartilage. The shift created just enough space. Peyton dove in with the vascular clamp. Her fingers were slick, operating entirely on spatial memory and the faint anatomical landmarks beneath the pooling blood. There. She felt the ragged, pulsing edge of the artery. She maneuvered the titanium clamp, adjusting her angle by a millimeter, and squeezed the ratcheted handle. Click, click, click. The geyser stopped. The suction machine greedily cleared the remaining pool, revealing the pristine, terrifying landscape of Elias's upper chest. The bullet had missed his lung by a fraction of an inch, detonating against his collarbone and sending shrapnel directly into the vascular highway. Peyton let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. Got it, she whispered. Jesse stared at her hands, then slowly looked up at her face. There was a smear of blood across her cheekbone, her pale green eyes shining intensely in the harsh light. For a fleeting second, the mission, the hangar, and the danger faded. Jesse looked at her with an expression of profound, unfiltered awe. Vitals are stabilizing, the young medic called out from the head of the bed, his voice trembling with relief. Pressure is coming up. 80/50. Keep squeezing those bags, Peyton ordered, not looking away from the wound. He's still critically empty. She turned her attention back to the surgical tray, selecting a fine, curved needle and a spool of Prolene suture. Jesse, hold the clamp steady. Do not let it shift. For the next 45 minutes, the hangar was silent, save for the hum of the portable generator and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Peyton worked with a mesmerizing, terrifying efficiency. She debrided the shredded tissue, isolated the artery, and meticulously stitched the torn vessel back together. It was a delicate, grueling dance. Every time she needed an instrument, Jesse anticipated it, handing it to her before she could even ask. They moved in a strange, intimate synchronicity, two professionals at the absolute apex of their respective deadly crafts, communicating through micro-expressions and the shared language of survival. Tying off, Peyton finally murmured, her fingers deftly weaving the final knot. She carefully released the vascular clamp. She stared at the repaired artery. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. It held. No leaks, no ruptures. He's closed, Peyton said, stepping back from the table. She stripped her bloody latex gloves off, tossing them onto the sterile field. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright suddenly vanished, leaving behind a hollow, dizzying exhaustion. She swayed slightly on her feet. Instantly, Jesse's hand was on the small of her back, warm and incredibly solid. He didn't say anything, but the steady pressure of his palm anchored her to the floor. I've got you, Jesse said quietly, echoing the words she had spoken to Elias. Peyton looked up at him. They were standing inches apart. She could see the fatigue etched into the lines around his eyes, the heavy burden of command he carried. She wanted to lean into him, just for a second, to let someone else carry the weight. She pulled away instead. The walls had to stay up. He needs broad-spectrum antibiotics, and he needs to stay flat. Peyton instructed the medic, her voice returning to its clinical detachment. If he moves, he'll tear the graft. Where is the medevac? On standby, Jesse said, pulling his tactical jacket back on. We'll transport him to a secure wing at Walter Reed once he's stable enough to fly. You saved his life, Peyton. I bought him time, she corrected, walking over to the metal sink in the corner of the hangar to wash her hands. The water was freezing. If that graft blows at 30,000 feet, he's dead. She scrubbed the blood from beneath her nails. the exact same motion she had been doing 2 hours ago at the hospital. It felt like a lifetime had passed. She turned off the water and dried her hands on a rough paper towel. She looked across the hangar at Jesse. "You said you couldn't go to Landstuhl because of the asset," Peyton said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Because if the world knew you were there, the asset was dead." Jesse's jaw tightened. "That's right. Who did you pull out of Eastern Europe, Jesse?" Peyton asked, stepping slowly away from the sink. The operative in her was waking up again, piecing together the tactical puzzle. To risk Elias's life, to risk exposing a Tier 1 unit, it has to be someone massive. Jesse looked at her for a long time. The silence in the hangar grew heavy, oppressive. "You did your job, Peyton," Jesse said, his voice low, protective. "Let me put you in a car. Let me take you home. You don't want to know this. Once you cross this line, you're back in. And I promised I wouldn't let that happen." "Jesse," Peyton said, her voice laced with absolute authority. "Show me." Jesse closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He knew he couldn't stop her. He gave a microscopic nod and gestured toward a small, reinforced office block built into the side of the hangar. 2 heavily armed operators stood guard outside the frosted glass door of the office. They parted silently as Jesse approached, unlocking the door with a biometric scan. Peyton followed him inside. The room was Spartan. A metal desk, 2 chairs, and a blinking server rack in the corner. Sitting in one of the chairs, wrapped in an oversized military fleece, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her dark hair was cut bluntly at the jaw, framing a face that was terrifyingly pale and sharp. Her hands were cuffed to the desk, though she didn't seem to care. She was staring at the wall with a hollow, disconnected expression. Peyton looked at her, confused. "A kid? You risked your entire platoon for a kid?" "Her name is Anya," Jesse said quietly, closing the door behind them. "She's not just a kid. She's a quantum cryptographer for the SVR, Russian Foreign Intelligence." Peyton frowned. "Defectors happen all the time. The CIA handles that, not Echo Platoon." "She didn't defect to the CIA," Jesse corrected. "She specifically requested a JSOC extraction. She claimed she had proof of a compromised American asset." Anya slowly turned her head. Her eyes were dark, sunken, and unsettlingly old. They swept over Jesse and landed on Peyton. For a moment, the young Russian woman just stared. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth twitched into a ghostly, knowing smile. "It is true, then," Anya said. Her English was flawless, heavily accented but precise. "The dead do walk." Peyton froze. The blood turned to ice in her veins. "Who are you?" Anya leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow. "I am the one who intercepted the communique, Dr. Miller. Or should I say, Major." Peyton shot a look at Jesse. His face was stone, but she could see the tension radiating off him. He hadn't known Anya would recognize her. "What communique?" Peyton demanded, stepping closer to the desk. 5 years ago, Anya said softly, her eyes locked on Peyton's scarred oblique. "A drone strike in the Korangal Valley. It was supposed to eliminate a Taliban warlord. But the coordinates were altered. The strike hit a JSOC forward surgical tent instead." Peyton's breathing hitched. The phantom smell of burning canvas and copper filled her nose. She subconsciously pressed her hand against her side. "The official report said it was a tragic system error," Anya continued, her voice echoing in the small room. "But I have the decryption keys to the SVR's deep cover archives. It was not an error. The coordinates were changed from inside the Pentagon." Peyton stared at her, the world suddenly tilting on its axis. "You're lying." "Someone wanted you dead, Major," Anya whispered. "Someone very high up. They missed. But recently, chatter began again. Someone realized the body in the wreckage did not match your dental records. They know you are alive, and they know Elias Thorne helped you vanish." Peyton took a stumbling step backward, hitting the wall. It wasn't a random black site op. They hadn't just gone to extract a Russian defector. They had gone into hostile territory to retrieve the only person who could prove Peyton had been hunted by her own government. Elias had taken a bullet for her. Peyton looked at Jesse. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a dark, violent resolve. "Elias found out about Anya 3 weeks ago," Jesse explained, his voice rough. "He realized that if the SVR knew you were alive, the mole in the Pentagon would find out too. He put the op together off the books. He went in to get the proof to clear your name, to keep you safe." Peyton slowly slid down the wall, crouching on the floor, burying her face in her hands. The safe, quiet life she had built in Seattle, the hospital, the rainy walks, the anonymity shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She was a ghost, and the people who killed her were coming to finish the job. Jesse walked over and crouched in front of her. He didn't touch her this time. He just existed in her space, an immovable object offering shelter in the storm. "We have the proof now," Jesse said softly. "Anya has the burn drive. We can identify the mole. But we can't trust the chain of command. We are officially rogue, Peyton. Me, my team, and you." Peyton slowly lifted her head. The terror in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, searing emerald fire. The nurse was dead. The major had finally returned. "We need a secure location to decrypt the drive," Peyton said, her voice dead flat. "I have a safe house in the Cascades," Jesse replied, his eyes locking onto hers, seeing the terrifying shift in her demeanor. "Off-grid. Untraceable. Load Elias into the SUV. We aren't going to Walter Reed," Peyton commanded, standing up. She looked at Anya, then back at Jesse. "If they want the ghost, we'll give them the ghost. But we're going to burn their house down on the way out." The drive into the Cascades was punishing. The torrential rain of Seattle morphed into a blinding, horizontal sleet as they climbed higher in elevation. The black Suburbans, stripped of any tracking telemetry, navigated the treacherous, winding logging roads entirely under the eerie green glow of night vision. Inside the lead vehicle, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Peyton sat in the expansive cargo area, having converted it into a mobile intensive care unit for Elias. She had her knees pressed against the cold metal floor, her eyes continuously jumping between Elias's pale, sweat-slicked face and the battery-operated portable monitor displaying his heart rhythm. Every jolt of the suspension made her breath catch. If the graph tore now, in the middle of nowhere, there would be no saving him. Jesse sat in the rear passenger seat, his body angled so he could watch both the tree line through the heavily tinted windows and Peyton. He hadn't spoken since they left the hangar. His silence wasn't empty. It was the calculated, simmering quiet of a commander preparing his men for war. "How is he?" Jesse finally asked, his voice low, barely carrying over the rumble of the engine. "Hanging on," Peyton replied, checking Elias's IV line. "But he's burning through the antibiotics. He needs a sterile environment, Jesse, not a hunting cabin." "It's more than a hunting cabin," Jesse said. An hour later, they arrived. Hidden behind a dense canopy of ancient Douglas firs, built directly into the side of a granite cliff, was a fortified structure of timber and steel. It was practically invisible from the air, masked by the natural topography. The team moved with ruthless efficiency. They carried Elias inside, setting him up on a heavy oak table in the center of the main room that Peyton immediately sterilized with bleach. Anya was ushered into a small, windowless back room with a portable encrypted terminal, 2 operators standing guard at her door. Once Elias was stabilized, connected to an IV drip suspended from a ceiling beam, Peyton finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She walked into the small kitchen area. The cabin was freezing, the air biting her lungs. She gripped the edge of the sink, hanging her head as the sheer weight of the last 24 hours threatened to crush her. 5 years of hiding, 5 years of pretending to be unremarkable, all undone in a single night. A heavy, woolen blanket settled over her shoulders. She flinched, spinning around. Jesse stood there. He had removed his tactical rig, wearing only a black thermal shirt that hugged his broad chest. Up close, without the immediate threat of crossfire or catastrophic bleeding, the intense physical proximity between them was undeniable. "You're shaking," he said softly. "I'm not cold," Peyton lied, pulling the blanket tighter around herself anyway. Jesse didn't call her on it. Instead, he leaned against the counter next to her, staring out the reinforced window into the pitch-black forest. "When Elias told me about you," Jesse started, his voice a low rumble, "he said you were the finest trauma surgeon JSOC ever had. He said you didn't just fix people. You fought death off them with your bare hands." He paused, looking down at her. "He also said the betrayal broke you." Peyton looked away, her jaw tight. "It didn't break me. It woke me up. I realized we were just chess pieces to the brass. Expendable, not to us," Jesse corrected, stepping slightly closer. "Not to Elias, not to my team." Peyton finally looked up at him, her green eyes searching his dark ones. "Why are you doing this, Jesse? Why risk a court-martial, or worse, For a ghost you didn't even know. Because Elias is my brother, Jesse said. He raised his hand, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before gently tucking a stray lock of damp hair behind Peyton's ear. His touch was incredibly gentle for a man made of calluses and violence. And because I don't leave my people behind, you may have taken off the uniform, Peyton, but you never stopped being one of us. Peyton's breath hitched. For 5 years, she had carried the trauma alone. To be seen, truly seen by someone who understood the exact nature of the darkness she had survived, felt like taking a full breath for the first time in half a decade. The moment was shattered by the sharp slam of a door. Anya stumbled out of the back room, clutching a small flash drive, her face whiter than snow. The 2 operators flanked her closely. I have decrypted the core file, Anya said, her voice trembling slightly. The communications log from 5 years ago, and the current kill orders. Jesse's demeanor instantly snapped back to ice. He stepped away from Peyton. Who is it? It is a 4-star, Anya whispered, looking at Peyton. General Thomas Vance, head of Covert Operations Command. He ordered the strike on your surgical tent, Major, because your unit uncovered the slush fund he was using to arm local warlords. Peyton felt the floor drop out beneath her. Vance. He had pinned medals on her chest. He had given the eulogy at her fake funeral. And the current orders? Jesse demanded. Anya swallowed hard. He knows Elias went off book to get me. Vance didn't alert the DOD. He didn't want a paper trail. He dispatched a private military contractor element, a wet work team. Jesse's radio crackled instantly. It was his sniper on the roof. Echo Actual, we have movement in the tree line. Suppressed thermals. They're closing in. Jesse looked at Peyton, the unspoken reality hanging violently between them. Vance hadn't waited for them to slip up. He had tracked them. Perimeter defense! Right now! Jesse roared, drawing his sidearm. The siege had begun. The cabin plunged into total darkness as Jesse killed the main breaker. In the sudden blackout, the only illumination came from the faint moonlight reflecting off the snow outside, casting long, skeletal shadows across the wooden floors. Twip, twip, twip. The sound of suppressed rounds impacting the reinforced timber of the cabin was sickeningly quiet, like heavy raindrops hitting a tin roof. But the damage was lethal. The front window shattered inward, raining glass over the kitchen counter where Peyton had been standing seconds before. Get down, Jesse yelled, grabbing Peyton by the waist and dragging her behind the heavy oak island. The team returned fire. The deafening roar of unsuppressed M4 rifles erupted inside the enclosed space, deafening and disorienting. Muzzle flashes illuminated the cabin in strobe light bursts of violent yellow, revealing the operators moving with terrifying, practiced lethality from window to window. They're flanking south, one of the operators shouted over the gunfire. Peyton didn't freeze. The panic she had felt at the hospital was gone, entirely burned away by the familiar, surging rush of combat adrenaline. She wasn't Nurse Miller anymore. She was Major Peyton, and her hospital was under attack. She crawled on her hands and knees through the glass-strewn floor toward the center of the room. Elias lay perfectly still on the table, oblivious to the war raging around him, but his IV line was exposed. A round tore through the wall inches above Elias's head, embedding itself in the stone fireplace. I need cover, Peyton screamed. Jesse didn't hesitate. He abandoned his position at the window, sliding across the floor to position his body like a human shield between the incoming fire and the medical table. He laid suppressive fire out the shattered window, his face a mask of pure, concentrated fury. Get him to the cellar, Jesse ordered, ejecting a spent magazine and slapping a fresh one in with a metallic clack. Peyton unhooked the IV bag, clamping it in her teeth. She grabbed the heavy canvas handles of the tactical gurney. 2 operators fell back to assist her. Together, they manhandled the heavy table toward the heavy iron trapdoor leading beneath the cabin. They have breaching charges, the sniper yelled over the comms, right before a massive explosion rocked the foundation. The front door blew off its hinges, a wave of concussive force, smoke, and snow, throwing Jesse backward into the wall. 3 men in black tactical gear poured through the breach, their rifles raised. Peyton dropped the gurney handles. She didn't think. Instinct took over. She grabbed a heavy, cast-iron fireplace poker from the hearth. As the lead contractor swept his barrel toward the cellar door, Peyton lunged. She didn't strike wildly. She moved with surgical precision. She drove the blunt end of the iron bar directly into the vulnerable gap between the man's ballistic vest and his helmet, crushing his collarbone. The man collapsed, his rifle clattering to the floor. Jesse, recovering from the blast, drew his combat knife and engaged the second man in brutal, close-quarters hand-to-hand combat. The third contractor raised his weapon, aiming directly at Jesse's exposed back. Peyton snatched the dropped rifle from the floor. She hadn't fired a weapon in 5 years, but muscle memory never forgot. She snapped the stock to her shoulder, flipped the selector switch to semi-auto, and squeezed the trigger twice. Bang! Bang! The third contractor dropped instantly. Jesse finished his man, driving his knee into the contractor's chest and sinking his blade into a gap in the armor. He stood up, chest heaving, his dark eyes snapping to Peyton. She was standing over the body, the rifle held perfectly level, her breathing slow and controlled. She didn't look terrified. She looked deadly. "They're falling back," an operator called out from the window. Regrouping in the tree line, Jesse walked over to Peyton. He gently placed his hand over the barrel of her rifle, lowering it. "You good?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm fine," Peyton said, though her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline spike. She looked at the door. "They'll be back. With heavier ordnance, we can't hold this structure forever. We don't have to." Anya's voice rang out from the cellar stairs. She had crawled out of the back room during the firefight, clutching her laptop. "If we can establish a satellite uplink, I can use the decrypted drive. I can expose Vance." Peyton's eyes narrowed. A desperate, dangerous plan began to formulate in her mind. "Not just expose him," Peyton said, turning to Jesse. "We're going to use him to call off his own dogs." Jesse wiped a smear of blood from his cheek. "How?" "Vance ordered a wet work team. That means they have a direct satellite comms link to his command center," Peyton said, pointing to the dead contractor on the floor. She knelt down and ripped the encrypted radio off the man's tactical vest. She held the radio up, her green eyes burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. "I'm going to make a house call." The cabin was silent again, save for the wind howling through the shattered windows. The cold was bitter, biting into Peyton's skin and freezing the blood pooling on the floorboards. The acrid smell of cordite and burnt timber hung heavy in the air, a visceral reminder that their borrowed time was rapidly bleeding out. Peyton sat cross-legged on the floor behind the heavy oak island, her fingers pressed lightly to Elias's neck to monitor his pulse. His breathing was shallow, his skin ashen. Beside her, Anya had the dead contractor's radio wired directly into the exposed motherboard of her encrypted terminal. Anya's fingers flew across the keyboard in a frantic blur. Lines of code cascaded down the dark screen, reflecting off the Russian operative's pale eyes. She was bypassing the contractor's localized network, peeling back the layers of encryption to trace the signal back to its primary source. "They're going to track this ping," Jesse warned, crouching beside Peyton. He kept his M4 resting across his knees, his eyes darting toward the ruined front entrance. "The second you open a channel, Vance's cyber team will lock onto our coordinates. They'll drop a JDAM on this mountain." "Not if I bounce the uplink through SVR proxy servers in Moscow first," Anya muttered, her jaw tight with concentration. "It will look like the call is originating from inside the Kremlin. By the time they unravel the digital maze, we will be finished." She hit a final keystroke. "I have the direct uplink. It connects straight to an unlisted command node in the Pentagon. It has to be Vance." Peyton looked down at the radio handset. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands were entirely steady. She had spent 5 years running from the ghost of General Thomas Vance. She wasn't running anymore. "Do it," Peyton said. Jesse watched her with a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. She was no longer the exhausted nurse he had cornered at the hospital. She was a weapon forged in the ultimate fire, and she was about to turn the blade on the man who had ordered her death. The radio crackled with heavy, electronic static. Then, a deep, authoritative voice echoed from the small speaker, cutting through the silence of the cabin. "Viper Actual, Sitrep. Is the package secured? Confirm KIA on the rogue element." It was Vance. The sound of his voice, the exact same baritone that had praised her surgical skill during a metal pinning ceremony years ago, made Peyton's stomach twist violently. But she kept her face entirely blank. She grabbed the radio handset, depressing the talk button. "They missed, Tom," Peyton said, her voice perfectly steady, carrying an icy, terrifying calm over the satellite link. "Just like they missed in the Korengal." There was a dead, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. It was the distinct, heavy silence that only happens when a dead woman speaks. "Who is this?" Vance demanded, though the sudden, microscopic tremor in his voice betrayed his panic. "You know exactly who it is," Peyton replied. "I'm looking at a decrypted SVR burn drive right now, General. I'm looking at the offshore ledgers. Account ending in 4,409 inches Zurich. I'm looking at the exact coordinates you manually altered to drop a Hellfire missile on my surgical tent to cover your tracks." Peyton didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet certainty of her words was devastatingly lethal. "You're dead," Vance hissed, the composure stripping away from him. "This is a fabrication. A deep fake designed by Russian intelligence. Is it a fabrication that you told me I was the tip of the spear right before I deployed?" Peyton countered smoothly, quoting a private conversation they had shared in his Pentagon office. "Before you snapped the shaft to save your own political career?" Silence again. He knew. "I can erase you all over again," Vance threatened, his voice dropping to a dark, venomous growl. "I know about Seattle. I know about St. Jude's Hospital. I will rip your new life apart until there is nothing left but ash." "You don't have that kind of time," Peyton said, ignoring his bluff. She glanced at Anya's screen. "I have an uplink established, Vance. Anya has written an executable script. In exactly 60 seconds, every piece of encrypted data proving your treason, the slush funds, the weapons deals, the murder of American soldiers will be mass emailed to the director of the CIA, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the top 5 news outlets in the world." "You wouldn't dare," Vance sneered, though it sounded desperate. "You're a ghost. You hit send, you expose yourself, you expose the SEALs with you. You'll spend the rest of your life in a black site." "I'm tired of hiding," Peyton said simply. She looked at Jesse. He was staring back at her, his eyes dark and unwavering, communicating absolute solidarity without a single word. He shifted his grip on his rifle, "And the men with me are more than willing to burn down the house to flush the rats out," Peyton continued into the radio. "You have exactly 40 seconds to call off the contractors outside this cabin, or your life, your legacy, and your freedom are over." Jesse leaned in close to the microphone, his shoulder pressing solidly against Peyton's. "This is Echo Actual. We are dug in, General. If your men come through that door again, we'll send them back in bags. Make the call." The silence stretched over the radio waves, thick and unbearable. Peyton watched the digital timer on Anya's screen ticking down. 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Jesse's earpiece crackled. "Echo Actual," his sniper whispered tightly. "Thermals show them stacking up at the breach point. They're preparing to make entry. They have frag grenades." Jesse didn't blink. He raised his M4, aiming dead center at the shattered doorway, clicking the safety selector off. If Vance called her bluff, they would have to fight to the death right here on the bloodstained floor. 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 5. "Viper Actual, this is Command." Vance's voice suddenly erupted over the radio. He sounded suddenly ancient, entirely defeated by the checkmate. "Abort the assault. I repeat, abort the assault immediately. Fall back to extraction point." Outside the cabin, the heavy, coordinated crunch of tactical boots retreating through the snow confirmed the order. The kill team was leaving. The siege was broken. Peyton let out a ragged breath she felt like she had been holding for 5 years. She dropped the radio handset on the floor, her hands finally beginning to shake as the massive spike of adrenaline began to recede. "Did you stop the upload?" Jesse asked Anya, lowering his weapon but keeping his eyes on the door. Anya looked up from her screen, a dark, vindictively satisfied smile playing on her lips. She closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "I lied about the countdown script. The files were already sent 3 minutes ago." Peyton stared at her for a second, then let out a sharp, breathless laugh, a genuine sound of absolute, overwhelming relief. Vance had just called off his dogs to save himself, only to seal his own fate anyway. By morning, federal agents would be kicking down his door. Jesse reached over, his large hand wrapping securely around Peyton's trembling arm. He pulled her gently to her feet, stepping over the debris. The immediate threat was gone, leaving behind only the biting cold, the physical wreckage of the cabin, and the quiet, profound aftermath of survival. "You did it," Jesse said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't let go of her arm. He stepped into her space, looking down at her, stripping away every ounce of his tactical armor and command distance. "You stopped running." Peyton looked up into his dark eyes. The magnetic pull between them forged in blood, trauma, and the sheer desperate adrenaline of the last 24 hours finally broke through the last of her defenses. I couldn't have done it without you, Peyton whispered, her voice hitching slightly. Jesse didn't say another word. He reached out, framing her face with both his hands, his thumbs gently sweeping over the dirt and dried blood on her cheeks. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, careful kiss. It was deep, desperate, and fierce, a physical manifestation of surviving the impossible and anchoring themselves to each other. Peyton kissed him back just as hard, her hands coming up to grip the collar of his tactical shirt. She held on to him in the dark, the ghosts of her past finally silencing their whispers. For the first time since the fire in the Koringal Valley, Peyton didn't feel like a phantom haunting her own life. She felt entirely, undeniably alive. By dawn, 2 unmarked Black Hawks landed in the clearing outside the cabin. Elias was stabilized and airlifted to a secure, loyal JSOC medical facility. General Vance was arrested at his home before he could even shred his hard drives. Peyton stood on the porch of the shattered cabin, watching the sun crest over the snow-capped Cascades. Jesse stood beside her, their shoulders brushing. She knew she couldn't go back to Street Jude's memorial. Nurse Miller was gone. But Major Peyton didn't have to hide anymore. You can never truly outrun the ghosts of your past, but when you stop running and finally turn to face them, you realize you don't have to fight them alone. If you loved this story of redemption, survival, and unexpected romance, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more original, cinematic stories every week.